What is the essence of stress? How to deal with it and how to win? Why do we consciously and unconsciously bring stress to our colleagues, friends, and even our closest ones, our family? And what does stress resistance depend on? Stress, in its usual sense, causes negative emotions in us. But from the physiological point of view, the initial reaction to short-term strong emotions, fear or joy, will be the same. This was discovered in the 20th century by the physician and biologist Hans Selye. Hans Selye has established that we react both on pain and joy with the same chain of biochemical reactions. The body immediately releases the hormone adrenocorticotropin, which stimulates the production of cortisol. A stress hormone, cortisol in its turn stimulates the production of adrenaline and norepinephrine. We have a heart acceleration, we turn pale or blush. These hormones cause similar reactions to completely different emotions. We can freeze from unexpected joy and from fear. And we can make impulsive actions to rush, embrace, or run away.
Unfortunately, any emotion can lead to negative consequences in the form of hypertonic reactions of vascular spasm and, unfortunately, acute vascular and neurological conditions. Therefore, the concept of dying from joy has a deep psychological meaning.
Of course, great joy can lead to a shock. But despite the fact that biochemical processes are so similar, for joy, people experience a heart attack much rarely than from fear and grief. Why does this happen? First, along with positive emotions, we also get a large dose of joy hormones, serotonin and dopamine, which give us pleasure and relaxation. In addition, joy and euphoria rarely last long. They are quickly replaced by satisfaction, contentment, tranquility. And if the joy is so fleeting, then the stress can last for years. And it is the long-term impact of strong emotions that is so destructive. But why are we the most successful species on the planet who defeat disease, hunger, and cold, so suffer from stress? Humanity has lived with stress from the moment of its appearance. Most animals occupy a certain ecological niche, eat a certain food, and do not leave their habitat area. Man inhabited the entire globe. He hunts, fishes, gathers, farms. We have achieved a lot, and the price for it is constant stress. Man can live everywhere, and moreover, it was always like this. It's like our kind of chip, our ability to live and adapt to anything. And a variety of stresses are being tested along the way. So, there is no sense talking about stress in general in antiquity and modern times at all, because it was very different before and now. But at the same time, the reasons that cause stress almost did not change over the past millennia. We are still dependent on basic needs. We, like thousands of years ago, need a house, warmth, food. Fear of losing all this keeps us stressed. We just have new fears. Like if a person was afraid that he will not have food, water, or warmth before, now we are afraid that, for example, we will be fired from work, but the meaning will be the same. If we are fired from work, then it would be no food, money for the bills, and a lot of other problems. So, again, the resources stayed all the same. Stress has always helped us in our achievements. This is a kind of training for the body. Thanks to stress, the ability to adapt is developed, and this increases the chances of survival.
If there is no adaptation, if there are no recurring stress and the organism does not change, then we do not live. The understanding that stress is a pathology is wrong. Stress is a psychological reaction of an organism to changing environmental conditions.
Stress is our engine even now. If we were not afraid, did not hurry, did not worry for the results of our work, did not worry for our loved ones, we would hardly do anything at all. We could hardly appreciate something and love someone. Stress ceases to build and begins to erode when we feel our own helplessness. Man sought to get more and more at all times, something that he didn't have before. A higher position in society, the best income. And if the desire seems impossible, it creates stress. The modern consumer society provokes stress even more. We want more beautiful clothes, better cars, a holiday in an expensive resort. and we cannot always get it right away. A person immediately falls into stress mode because there is a goal. But what is it? Unattainable. Hence, people get interesting feelings that are closely related to the same mode of stress. This is a state of helplessness, worthlessness. How to overcome these feelings? To abandon an unattainable goal is unlikely to help. On the contrary, it will only increase frustration in yourself and your power. We must try to figure out whether we really need what we dream about. Or is the desire to have an expensive car imposed by advertising, environment, stereotypes? If so, why should we waste the time, energy, and money for something that we really do not need? If the goal is really desirable, then it is necessary to make a plan how to achieve it step by step. Put aside a small amount of money to start a bank. Go to refresher courses to be able to earn more. How should the goals look like? Achievable. They should be under the control of a person. The simplest option is to switch from a global goal to what? A small goal, and get pleasure from it. Unattainable goals which we set ourselves is the case when a person drives himself into stress. But we force each other into stress even more often. Wives, husbands, husbands, wives, subordinates, bosses, bosses, subordinates. And we do it consciously often. Usually, bosses prefer to create stress deliberately, manually, because the person in stress is more controlled. Well, more effective in terms of manipulation, because cognitive functions are turned off. Sometimes we drive each other into stress unconsciously. We just do not know how to achieve our goals differently. We do not know how to communicate. Correctly choose words. The simplest way to introduce a person into stress is to create modes when what we call a state of learned helplessness, right? When you do not know how to react. Well, for example, a wife says to her husband, "Be a man for once. Go and do something. Pay attention." The double message sounds like this: be a man for once. If he goes and does something, yes, then he admits that before he had never been a man. We decided to make an experiment. It will show how easy it is to put a person in stress. The psychologist will ask the interlocutor only one question. Truly, not very pleasant. Many of us often encounter similar situations at work or in the family. Can you ask me a smart question? How do you do it? I ask you to ask me a smart question, and you ask the wrong question. Well, can you ask me a question? No. There you are. Why can't you ask me a question? Well, I don't expect that from you. I'm asking you to ask me a question, and now you are keeping silent. I don't understand what kind of question. I do not expect that from you. I want you to ask me a question right now, any. How do you manage? Not that. Well, ask a question or not. What topic? Any smart question. There you are. A state of stress. The psychologist, of course, provoked the situation. In real life, we rarely hear such a question, but we are often asked to change something somehow, or behave somehow differently. In addition, the psychologist specifically addressed the interlocutor to you. Behind such informality, a certain model of communication from above is often hidden. This is especially painful if the second person is younger, lower on the career ladder, in a situation like the boss-subordinate, for example. You need to ask a person who is communicating with you not to put you in a state of stress and stop this communication. If such a communication does not stop, then you need to get up and go. It is necessary, therefore, to change this work. It is necessary to change a family, because if you are constantly stressed, getting sick is a matter of time. You cannot get sick. Then there are other situations. On a conscious level, a person begins to drink. On the unconscious, he begins to experience allergic reactions. Everyone will react in their own way, and there will be more or less stress in this situation, depending on the personality. But why are some people able to withstand stress in an easier way and others worse? We'll carry out the experiment. 2 chess players, approximately 1 professional level. The first game will be played in the usual comfortable conditions. While the game is in progress, we will calculate how much time each player takes to make decisions. Now the second stage. The chess game will be held in a very noisy environment. Now the results are very different. In the first game, player A required 5 to 7 seconds to make a decision. Now it is difficult for him to cope with it in 15 seconds. Meanwhile, his opponent shows roughly the same results as last time. How is this possible? What does stress resistance depend on?
The chain of biochemical reactions will be the same, but it will be realized in completely different ways at the level of behavioral and emotional reactions. The reaction of the body to stress depends on the genetic characteristics of an organism and the environment in which the person was brought up, the extent to which his adaptation took place. And if we say the colloquial term, the training for various changes in the external environment.
So, if a person has been accustomed to doing lessons while neighbors are noisy figuring out the relationship or playing the piano since childhood, in the future, most likely he will work in a noisy environment better than others. On the other hand, if one of the parents has an alarming character, it is likely that the child will inherit a propensity for reduced stress resistance. This is not a bad heredity. At one time, the genes that determine the tactics of human behavior helped our ancestors to survive. And if the genes responsible for anxiety are still in our DNA, then such a strategy can be successful. True, in a modern, relatively safe world, anxious people have more problems than advantages. There are so-called anxious hypochondriacs who live in stress all the time. It is possible to say metaphorically, they have a life like in the dentist chair all the time, and everything is dangerous for them. They, as a rule, stand out adrenaline constantly. And what is an organism which allocated adrenaline is constantly? Yes? Well, the blood is constantly poisoned by hormones. These people are always scared. They are always under stress. Constant stress can and should be switched off. In general, all the directions of psychology and psychotherapy work with stress one way or another. A lot of practices, yoga, Chinese breathing exercises, stay in the cells of sensory deprivation, help to relieve stress. Effective art therapy and animal therapy, communication with animals. There is even a technique called stress management. Literally, it means managing stress. The technique includes exercises that allow you to remove stress during the day in any situation, at work, home, and on transport.
All you need is to breathe in a certain way. For example, according to the yoga technique of the square, you draw a breath in 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale into 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And another pause. 1, 2, 3, 4. And when people advise count to 10, this does not work. But if you breathe at least 10-15 cycles, according to the yogic method, you can do it even when the boss screams at you. It really works.
In a stressful situation, it is important to manage your emotions, but not to suppress them. In the case of emotional aggression, when people shout at us, at home, at work, in the store, it's very difficult to pretend that this does not concern us. Sometimes it is impossible to ignore the emotional aggression. You need to show that the situation, as psychologists say, catches you. You are concerned. You got hurt. Therefore, you must return the favor, but a little less. And at times, intensively. For example, here the boss is shouting, so you should also raise your voice. But for milliseconds, more precisely for a second, and then immediately come back to constructive intonation. For example, you hear the intensity of the scream of the boss, and you adjust your voice a little lower, and then come back to normal conversation. Another important point of stress management is the daily routine. Fear of not having time is a source of constant stress for many people. Good time management is important here. That is the ability to distribute your time, and not only working hours. Otherwise, the feeling that you are late is going to cause stress again and again.
The best method is simple. You set yourself one specific task, very small and realistically achievable, maybe for an hour, maybe for 2, well, in extreme cases for 4 hours, and it is not necessary to plan something when you think that you will sit for 14 hours in a row and will work for 14 hours. This is inefficient. And now you're doing this little block, say an hour or 2, and then accordingly, you encourage yourself with some pleasant thing. That is, you can drink a cup of tea, and maybe there's a 5-10 minute rest. But it's hardly worth doing it in social networks.
Social networks as they are, not bad and not good. A change of activity is the best rest. And if you worked at a computer, then you really will not be able to rest in the social network in front of the screen. You risk overloading your brain with information. We have a lot of information now. Telephones, computers, TV, advertising, communication. A lot of information that our brain does not have time to evaluate. And of course, because of this information overload, we begin to get stressed, fall into stress. Fatigue arises in us, almost chronic fatigue, not chronic depression, and something like that. Physical activity relieves stress and allows you to relax. In addition, lack of movement is often a cause of stress itself. Genetically, a person is programmed to move a lot, especially during stress. Adrenaline is called the hormone hit or run, not without a reason. The main techniques to overcome stress is physical activity. It burns out adrenaline, because a stressful situation, as a rule, is an adrenaline rush. And most importantly, do not try to do all the things in one day. Then a lack of sleep and stress are guaranteed. We must prioritize.
Successful people are not the ones who do everything at once every day, but they are those who manage to do important things within a year, within a month, during the week, because the number of cases in a creative person's life are not limited by anything.
Constant stress is not only a problem at work or in the family. It is dangerous to our health. Stress causes hormonal disorders. Strangely enough, the body is lowering the level of cortisol, a stress hormone. The ability to synthesize any substance in the body is not unlimited. That is, the cell cannot indefinitely produce cortisol. At some point, the stage of exhaustion begins. And despite the ongoing stress, cortisol is simply not enough.
This stage is often described by psychologists and psychiatrists as depression or anxiety syndrome, based on not high, but on an oppositely low level of cortisol.
In addition, our body simply cannot function normally without cortisol. Cortisol is necessary for us to wake up in the morning, adequately react to danger. This hormone also affects blood pressure. With a shortage of cortisol, it can fall below a safe level.
Low level of cortisol is bad for the body. It does not leave with a low level of cortisol. This condition is called adrenal insufficiency and threatens with death, because the body cannot adapt to the changing factors of the external environment. And such patients, if they do not receive adequate therapy, during a period of stress or exacerbation of chronic diseases, can die from acute adrenal insufficiency.
Stress causes a number of diseases. Emotionally unstable people often suffer from psoriasis, duodenal and stomach ulcers, thyroid diseases. In addition, those who are unstable to stress are very prone to neuropsychiatric diseases.
A variety of borderline neurotic disorders, which include panic attacks, generalized anxiety syndrome, and many others that neurologists, psychiatrists, and psychotherapists are well acquainted with, and which stand at the borderline between norm and pathology.
People who do not have enough stress in their lives are looking for it in extreme sports, dangerous work, in the worst case, scandals and quarrels. So, stress is part of our life. The whole trouble is not in the stress itself, but in the fact that we do not put enough attention to it. At the same time, we take vitamins, vaccinate, visit a doctor, and follow a diet. We often stoically tolerate stress, whereas it can and should be fought with. And for this, there are methods and practices, from ancient yoga to modern stress management. We can choose, be in a constant destructive tension, or start looking for ways out. After all, we tamed fire, built roads and houses, flew into space. A human has enough potential to conquer his own stress.